This lesson focuses on a very important skill for your Task 2 essays, and that is how to use details. Why are details important for your Task 2 essays? Well, one reason is that adding details, really mastering how to use details, can make your essay planning easier. And the reason why is a very simple one. When you can use details, when details come to you quickly and you can add them to your, especially your body paragraphs, you don't have to think of as many arguments, as many main points to make in your paragraphs. You can make one or two main points, and then the rest of your time you use to support those main points with detailed information. It makes brainstorming and planning for your essays easier. We're going to see an example of that in just a minute in this lesson when we look at how to use details to support those main points. Okay, so it makes planning easier because you don't have to think of as many arguments or main ideas for your paragraphs. It also makes your writing clearer, okay? It allows the reader to know what you mean. Those details help to clarify your ideas and to really express exactly what you mean by the main points you're making. So it should be no surprise that adding details effectively will help your coherence and cohesion score and your task response scores on your IELTS essays. Remember, coherence and cohesion is about how well the ideas in your paragraphs flow from one to the next, that they're logically connected. That's what details help you to do. They allow you to make a main point in your paragraphs, and then you explain that main point and explain what you mean by it and how it connects to the main idea of your whole essay. Okay, so these details help you to really make connections between the ideas in your paragraphs. We'll see an example of that in just a moment. Also, it helps with your task response score. Task response is about how well you fulfilled all the requirements of the essay prompt provided to you. So they're looking for how well and how completely did you answer and fulfill all the requirements of the essay prompt, okay? And so the details allow you to provide a much more complete answer. Instead of just making a general point, you explain it in depth with the details you provide. Okay, so they're looking for this for your task response score. All right, so hopefully you're convinced here. Details are important and they're a critical piece of your Task 2 essays. Let's see how to add details. All right. Let's begin with a sample paragraph. All right, now this isn't much of a paragraph actually. This is only 2 sentences. All right, now we can imagine the question here perhaps is, whether you prefer living in the city or in the countryside. All right, so this person prefers to live in the countryside. And here in this very short paragraph that we see in front of us, the writer provides 2 main points, 2 very general points. It says, I prefer living in the countryside over living in a big city because country life is much less stressful than city life. I also enjoy living close to nature. Okay, now, when I look at some students' essays, this is the kind of information that I see in the first draft of their essays, okay? There are 2 main points here, no details whatsoever, and the student comes to me and says, well, I just can't think about what to add to the paragraph. I can't think of more points, more reasons why I like the countryside over the big city. And I say, okay, well, rather than thinking of more main points, why don't we explain what you mean by these 2 points that you make here? Okay, so the first thing to consider would be, what are some reasons for this? What are some reasons why country life is less stressful than city life to you? Could you explain that more? So here's an opportunity to add some detail to make it clear why country life is less stressful. Okay? Secondly then, to continue the paragraph, could you say 1 or 2 things you especially enjoy about living close to nature? What are some things that make being close to nature enjoyable, nice, relaxing, whatever it is, to you? And providing those details will make your ideas much clearer and improve this paragraph significantly. Okay, so let's do that. Let's look at how we could add those details to improve this paragraph. We begin with the ideas that we just saw. Starting out, I prefer living in the countryside over living in a big city. Now, let's add a transition kind of phrase here, okay? So indicating that we're going to provide some reasons for this opinion in the paragraph that we're looking for. All right, so we begin. One reason for this is that I find country life much less stressful than city life. And the details. In cities, even very mundane or boring, simple daily activities like finding a parking spot or getting a reservation at a restaurant can be very challenging and stressful. In rural areas, these problems rarely arise. Okay, some detail here. Being in the countryside for little daily activities like this is much less stressful. You don't have to worry about where you're going to park your car, or you don't have to worry there won't be a space for you at the restaurant you want to go to. In the city, that's common, okay? Here we get a good description of what the writer means by the point that being in the country is less stressful. All right, but we've got a second reason why that we saw originally, and that was another reason I prefer country life is that I enjoy living close to nature. Again, we've got our transition phrase here. Now we've got more information in this paragraph. So we have to make sure that we're clearly indicating that we're providing another main point after we've provided some details for the first main point that we discussed. Okay, so we're on to the next main point. We're thinking about living close to nature. Well, what are some reasons why you like to live close to nature? Let's look at those. I love to walk in the woods near my house. The fresh air is very invigorating, and the wildlife is fascinating to me. I've encountered deer, snakes, and many species of birds on my daily walks. To me, this is much better than a trip to the zoo. Okay, so here, this is a very personal essay topic here, okay? Not all IELTS topics are very personal, but here it's very appropriate to add some of the things that this person loves to do in nature and why living close to nature is especially nice for this person. Okay, so we got those details there. Okay, now let's look at what kinds of details will work for you in your IELTS essays. What details should you add? Well, one type I'm sure you're very familiar with are just simply adding examples, okay? So down below, we've got a sample statement, a sort of a main point that you might make in your paragraph, and we'll look at an example of that. So the statement, learning a foreign language involves much more than studying grammar rules and learning new vocabulary. Okay, so if we want to come up with an example of that, you could ask yourself, okay, what is one part of language learning that involves more than learning grammar and vocabulary? All right, well, we could come up with an example of that. I'm sure you could probably think of 10 examples for that, right? But here's one. For instance, without regular opportunities to speak, it is very difficult to acquire enough fluency to communicate effectively in daily life. Okay, that's one example of how learning a language involves more than grammar and vocabulary. You can also explain something. That can be another great type of detail. Okay, so answering the question why after you've made a statement. Here's our statement down below, okay? So, waiting until the last minute to study for an exam is a poor strategy. All right, explain that. Why is it a poor strategy? Well, studying a lot of material all at once makes it very difficult to retain information. Okay, there's a true statement, actually. I always advise my students not to cram or to study too much material all at once, and it provides good detail for this main point that we made in our statement. So, a good type of detail to include is an explanation. Okay, another kind of detail is to make a comparison. Explain what something is like. Okay, so we've got a statement down below. I would have a difficult time managing my life without my cell phone. Okay, so what's your cell phone like? Well, my phone's calendar is like my personal assistant, reminding me where I should be and when. I truly wouldn't know what to do from 1 hour to the next without this constant assistance. Okay, comparing the phone's calendar to a kind of personal assistant here is a detail that gives me a clear picture of why your cell phone is very important to you. Okay, a nice detail to add there. Couple more. you can state some facts. Okay, so here we've got a statement. Many efforts to protect the environment can be justified not only on moral grounds, but also on economic grounds. Okay, what economic reasons are there to support environmental efforts? All right, so what facts support this? Well, down below, the cost of producing energy from renewable resources like wind and solar power is becoming cheaper. In fact, many areas of the world, renewable energy can be produced more inexpensively than with fossil fuels. All right, some facts. These are great details to add, especially for your essay questions that are not very personal, right? They are more about a societal issue or about an economic issue or environmentalism. Any facts that you know are good details to include in your body paragraphs, okay? Now, some essay types on the IELTS, like we saw earlier about sort of living in the country versus city, they do ask you some questions that are a little more personal, okay, that you could use personal observations for. And so sometimes details that are just things that you know about are examples of people you know as well, things from your town or things that you've experienced before. These can be okay examples for some IELTS questions if they're about topics like family or about topics like education or other things like that you have experience with. Okay, so you can make observations as details in your Task 2 essays if it's appropriate. All right, so here we've got a statement. For many people, chasing a high salary leads to poor career choices. Okay, so what have you observed that would support this statement? I know several people who chose high-pressure careers in law and finance due largely to the prospect of earning a lot of money. Many of these people have already switched professions for lower-paying jobs that offer more balance. Okay, an observation from this person's life that supports the idea that it can be a mistake to just simply chase money when you're trying to make your career choices. Okay, so these observations with all of the others we've looked at so far, all the types of details, these are all ways you can add clarity, you can add specific information to your writing to support your main points. Okay, if there's one problem I often see, it's that students overuse examples. Okay, so throughout every body paragraph there is, for example, for example, for example. Well, now you've got 5 different kinds of details that are perfectly appropriate for your Task 2 essays that you can use, and you don't need to just overuse examples all of the time, okay? Now, examples are perfectly fine to use. You just don't want to overuse them. Okay, to review, details are important because they make your essay planning easier, okay? You don't have to think of lots of main points. You think of a few, and then you think of supporting details you can use to explain your ideas and make them clearer, okay? And that's the next point, is that these details really do help to explain your ideas much more in depth and with much more clarity. And this helps with your cohesion and coherence scores and your task response scores for your Task 2 essays, because it's much easier to follow your ideas when you add these details, and it allows you to answer the essay prompt completely and fully. We looked at some types of details as well. We've got examples, explanations, comparisons, facts, and observations. These are the kinds of things you should be adding to your body paragraphs to fill them out, okay? We looked at a sample paragraph where we started with really just 2 simple main points, 2 sentences at the beginning, and we created a nice long paragraph out of that was very clear and very descriptive simply by thinking about details we could add. Okay, so work on this. Notice how well you're using details in your writing, and keep trying to add them and to think of ways you can support your main points with these kinds of details we've looked at in this lesson.